Hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Matt Gets It podcast. This is a sports debate show discussing the biggest sports topics. I'm your host, Matt Martinez, and with me again today is Billy Ryan.
How's it going,
How's it
Matt?
going, Billy?
Doing well. Another good week. Another lot of interesting topics on sports.
Definitely, we got a lot of interesting topics to discuss. First things first, we're going to start with the MLB and continue with the hottest topic occurring right now, which is the torpedo bats. And just a refresher for anyone listening who's unfamiliar with it, several players around Major League Baseball are now using these torpedo bats, which is differently shaped from the traditional bats in a sense that the barrel is a little bit thicker, correct, Billy? That they moved certain parts of the thickness on the bat from the end on the or the cap towards the middle, which to is ensure more base hits and turn weakly hit ground balls into singles, doubles, and then turn those line drives into doubles into homers. Uh, More or less, right, Billy?
That is correct, and the idea behind that is 100%. Get more hits, but using alternate parts of the bat into the barrel is ultimately creating a harder surface on the barrel,
Mhm.
with that being widened. So yeah, you hit that right on the head.
And currently, there's 15 plus players in the MLB using the torpedo bat, with some notable players including are that are included Ellie De La Cruz, Dansby Swanson, Jazz Chisholm Jr., and Francisco Lindor. So uh, a lot of players are experimenting with this new bat. Last year it was also in effect, so this isn't completely brand new. It's just now that there's now a wider range of players using the bat. MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred was quoted saying that the torpedo bat is absolutely good for baseball. Manfred went on to say that he believes the issues like the torpedo bat and the debate around it demonstrate the fact that baseball occupies a unique place in our culture. Manfred ends his Q&A saying the bats comply within the rules, which has been highlighted since, opening day, that the players using these bats, the teams that are, arranging these bats to be used, they are within the rules. They're not violating any rules. The dimensions are within the guidelines. Billy, your thoughts on Commissioner Manfred's comments?
Like per one of our last podcasts, I was pretty on point with this, and I'm still on
Hmm.
point. I agree. If I hope to see maybe a larger sample size in the future of people using torpedo bats, but I agree it is good for baseball. I like the
Hmm.
hype around people looking into baseball and looking up torpedo bats, and ultimately it is bringing more recognition to the game, which we ultimately want. Baseball could be falling down over the last 5 years or so, maybe even harder than that.
Hmm.
And it's something that is bringing the hype back of baseball. And the ultimate thing to think about, and the most comparable way to think about, is the steroid hype in baseball, where it was like, man, when Mark McGwire, Barry Bonds, and Sammy Sosa were all hitting 60 jacks plus a year. And competing at such a high level, baseball was at its all-time high. That was only 20 years ago. Hard to believe that that's hard to kind of put back and enter the game, but I do like the hype being generated around it, and the people looking into baseball more.
Yeah, this more or less stems from like the the older generations of baseball fandom. The tradition that they hold, in regard to, how the game should be played with certain things, certain equipment, like, oh, we didn't have certain or different size bats when we played. Why should the newer age players get that, So that's where the biggest, concern is coming from at the moment. But then you also have pitchers, and this was highlighted in, opening weekend for pitcher for the Milwaukee Brewers when the Yankees, hit 9 home runs. The relief pitcher from the Brewers came out and said that, the torpedo bat's unfair, that it's giving an advantage to the hitter. So Billy, do you think that that has any validity, that the hitters are now gaining an upper hand on the pitchers?
yes and no. I got some mixed feelings when in terms of
Hmm.
coming to that. Like I do think like, hey, if
Okay.
we are going to regulate bats, because you got to look back in that
Hmm.
hasn't been a huge concept in the last 20 years where everybody was swinging a one piece and it was either made of ash or some other type of fairly hardwood and or softwood depending on what type of hitter you were. So, it is kind of crazy to think where it's like, man, if we had some type of technology with some of these
Hmm.
hitters, like who knows, if we gave Griffey a torpedo bat, he maybe breaks Babe Ruth's home run record from some missed hit doubles off the wall that are now over. Not saying, that's an exaggeration, obviously.
Uh-huh.
But with that as well, where it's like, hey, if we're going to allow some players to manipulate harder woods and or larger barrel length sizes that are still fitting parameters, I think we need to maybe potentially switch up the rule and or the hearing, because it was always against the rule to use a substance as a pitcher,
Hmm.
but it was always kind of looked
And
past.
when we say substance, we're referring to, their grips, correct, Billy? Like on the
Right.
pitches?
Correct. Like a
Yes.
pine tar, spider tack was one of the used.
Hmm.
I even heard some players using rosin from old pipe tobacco and or
Yeah.
products of that. Um, so like I said, it was never legal, but it was kind of a frowned upon thing if you got caught. Um, with that being in mind, I think that pitchers, like, there's no other thing they can manipulate other than a glove, which isn't going to help them with pitching, and or their hand, which they maybe other than a rosin bag, which there's been players who even got tested like a Scherzer. I remember that was when he was with
Hmm.
the Mets. He was using nothing but sweat and rosin, and he got popped and suspended for like 5 games and decided not to fight it. But it was like a thing where it's like, hey, dude, like the bag can only do so much when you're pitching.
Hmm.
And in my mind, I'd like to see, there was also a spike in like pitcher injuries when they went back from, using sticky substances. And then it ultimately also led in more hit batters
Hmm.
spike that next year.
Yeah, because the lack of control. Great point with the injuries there, Billy. I think the most notable one was Tyler Glasnow,
Yeah.
you know, and he was adamant about it. He was open about it. He was like, "Hey, man, I do not like this. They're taking away factors that help with our grip." And then specifically with him, he said he had to change his grip because of that, and then he thinks that's what led to his elbow injuries because he couldn't throw a certain way that he's been accustomed to for this long in his career.
I mean, and they say similar things with like Verlander. Verlander, obviously
Hmm.
a generational pitcher, and then as he's getting into his older years, is nothing but elbow injuries. And especially with pitchers who throw, splitters or pitches that tend to fall heavy on the elbow, big
Hmm.
factor. Where it's like, hey, they might be able to throw a pitch at 85% and get the same spin rates and things like that, where it does create less stress. But so what? They're getting more break or they're getting more control. Ultimately,
Hmm.
we want to see more strikes in the MLB, and we if we want to speed up the game, we do all these other measures. Why not? They're going to throw more strikes. That's going to lead to more pitches, swings, less walks. Ultimately, that's going to speed up the game microly, like every other rule is doing. I think the year since they've announced like some of these other rules, they're saving 15 to 20 minutes a game, and it's like if you're not a baseball player or a fan of baseball, does that 20 minutes really affect you?
Hmm. No, those are all great points that you brought up, Billy. Especially with, the pace of play situation that's been occurring, to the, purists of the game. That's not going to make a difference, just because they're so usually invested in the in-betweens of every pitch and every inning, let alone, getting back to the original point though, with Manfred's questions, I do believe that this is one of the few times, or not say few times, this is one of the rare times in recent years that he's finally gotten something right. Manfred is one of the most scrutinized commissioners in all of pro sports, and rightfully so. There's been a lot of questionable decisions on his end. That also falls onto the owners too. There's a lot of different factors at play, but a lot of the things that Manfred's been behind as of late, it rubs a lot of fans the wrong way. But when it comes to his comments on the torpedo bats saying they're good for baseball, I agree with him that he's finally understanding that. All right, like we're again, this goes back to they want to improve the game, but improving the pace of play, does that necessarily equate to improving or generating more excitement, right? The factor changing the equipment is going to bring in more excitement because now it's resulting in more hits, more home runs, which is more or less what the average viewer wants to see.
100%. And like I think the saying goes, chicks dig the long ball.
Yeah, that was an old commercial, right, with the Braves pitchers, right?
It was Greg
Uh,
Maddux and
was it Glavin?
Glavin, that's who it was. And then they had
Yeah,
McGuire hitting. It was like one of those all star commercials. Yeah.
yeah. And then they're hitting off tees, they're trying to hit and stuff. But they're like, yeah, great commercial. All right, folks, moving on, we got some basketball to discuss. The 2025 Basketball Hall of Fame class was recently announced, and there is a great amount of fantastic players who are now entering the Hall of Fame. First up, we got Carmelo Anthony, a three-time Olympic gold medalist, excuse me, and one of the most prolific scorers in NBA history, champion at Syracuse. Next, we got Dwight Howard, a three-time Defensive Player of the Year, one of the greatest Magic players in their franchise, tremendous force in the interior. In the WNBA, we got a trio of champions who are now entering the Hall of Fame. Sue Bird, four-time WNBA champion. Maya Moore, four-time WNBA champion, and Sylvia Fowles, excuse me, a two-time WNBA champion. Fowles herself was a terrific front court player. Maya Moore, one of the most talented players that I've witnessed, on the basketball court. Uh, just terrific scorer. She did score at all three levels, and then Sue Bird, a terrific floor general in her own right. Billy Donovan, the current Chicago Bulls head coach and former Florida Gators head coach, he won two NCAA championships during his tenure there, and Florida just won yesterday. or uh, yeah, today's Tuesday, correct, Billy? Yeah, so they won last night, and Billy Donovan is now headed into the Hall of Fame. Referee Danny Crawford, who officiated for 32 years, very notable referee, uh, officiated, I believe, 23 NBA finals during his career. And lastly, we got Mickey Arison, who is a general partner with the Miami Heat, who has three championships, uh, 2006, 2012, 2013. And then the 2008 Olympic men's team, or the Redeem team, they're going in together as a group into the Hall of Fame. So a few of those guys actually who are already in the Hall of Fame, they are now in the Hall of Fame for a second time. So that's interesting. Billy, do you have any thoughts on the Hall of Fame class? Were there any surprises to you?
To be honest, I feel like, don't get me wrong, I love Dwight Howard, but he's someone I feel
Hmm.
like didn't, he was a prolific part of the game when he played, but he didn't have a huge extended part of his career. I don't get me wrong, came up, slammed the ball, but it was
Hmm.
like noticeable. It was like I don't know what records he had broken or if there was something that was notable to me other than being maybe kind of a big name at the time.
Well, he's only a handful of players to win multiple Defensive Player of the Years, let alone three. I believe Ben Wallace has the most with four. So there's only a handful of, you know, guys to win multiple of those awards. So for him to have three, I think it's, I don't, to me personally, I don't think it's surprising. Uh, at one point in his career, he was the best center in the game, or, definitely top two.
Right.
Um, and I think more or less the in his later career definitely maybe fell off a bit, but he's also a champion. He won with the Lakers.
Fair, fair.
Whether a lot of people they call it what the bubble ring, right? But uh, I've that's a championship in my books. But was just Dwight was maybe the biggest surprise to you, Billy?
I think that, like, obviously, I agree with Carmelo Anthony. Like, I'm a big Nuggets
Mm-hmm.
fan over here.
Mm-hmm.
I hate to see him not win a championship. Even being with the Knicks after being with the Nuggets for plenty of years. that one hurts. But like that being said, I think Melo is one of those players that kind of
Hmm.
grew up with that era or in the same draft class as LeBron and a couple other people who are prolific in the game. And I think he kind of
Definitely.
stood on that of all time. And no, his time with the Nuggets, I think he's a staple here in Colorado. And I may be a little bit biased on that side, but maybe one of the better players to ever not win a championship.
That that series against the Lakers in what was it 2009 when him and Kobe were just like
They're duking it.
battling against each other. Yeah, they're like trying to establish post position. I remember seeing highlights and going back and watching that series. It's like, dude, talk about physicality, right?
Right?
Nowadays everyone's crying about the physicality, but it's like, man, like playoff basketball, like. But speaking of the Nuggets, Billy, that is a great transition into our next topic. Uh, Shocking news happening earlier today, folks. The Denver Nuggets fire both their head coach and general manager. Head coach Michael Malone and general manager Calvin Booth were fired today by the Denver Nuggets. Michael Malone was hired in 2015. This was his 10th season. Uh, the Nuggets are currently the fourth seed in the West right now, holding a 47-32 record, but they are in the midst of a four-game skid, Billy. Do you think that could have been a big indication or factor as to why they went in that direction? Michael Malone is the winningest coach in Nuggets history, 471 career wins, which includes 44 playoff wins and a 2023 NBA championship. Billy, your thoughts on the decision by the Nuggets to fire Malone?
Me being a Nuggets fan in the mix, I liked the trajectory of where the team was going. We won
Hmm.
the 2023 championship, came up close in the bubble, came up close in years past. So we have the last 5 years of being in the mix and being excited about basketball.
Hmm.
Um, and I think he kind of showed that. Like when we won the championship, he showed that he wanted to be here. He showed that loyalty to the Nuggets in Denver. And in quotes, "Let's run this shit back" was
At the parade, right?
oh man, one of the most things. Like, I was at the parade, and that atmosphere of that was the most
Hmm.
exciting thing that I've been a part of in a long time since maybe one of the Avs championships. I think it was the year before, and that was
And you've been
awesome.
spoiled as a Denver fan, huh?
Well, we
Like,
do get spoiled, except for the
like
Broncos. Like, don't get me wrong, we had the Peyton Manning era. We won a championship. We'll take it,
I count that like, I mean, granted, what was that 10 years ago?
right?
But still, like, think about how many fans out there who support their teams and their teams have never won anything, or it's been even longer than 15 years,
Right?
Hand up. Like, so hard to play the sympathy violin for you there, Billy. But I'll let you. Sorry to interrupt. I'll let you go on.
No, it's But like with that being said, and being so backed and behind the Nuggets,
Hmm.
I think there had to have been some things behind the scenes, especially over those last four losses. There had to have been an
Hmm.
attitude and or something going on, and or it's probably something stemming from the last few years, if I had to guess. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So where we're stuck is like, hey, we were in the mix of kind of being a playoff team and getting a 2 or 3 seed and looking okay for the West to. We're skidding a little bit. We're starting to fall behind, and
Hmm.
now we got to compete. Now we got to get rolling because we only got a handful of weeks left in the season. So you know, I saw that they promoted one of the assistant coaches to interim
Yes, the
coach.
lead assistant is now the head coach, correct? So,
So
according to ESPN's Shams Charania, this is the latest firing in NBA history. The Nuggets have 5 games left in the regular season, folks, and are in the thick of a playoff race. They are a half game ahead of the Clippers, Golden State, Minnesota, and Memphis right now. They're the fourth seed, so that half game is separating them between a home series in the first round and having to play in the play-in tournament. So that is that's a lot at stake currently, and so for them to go in this direction is very interesting, or most importantly, it's shocking just because, like you said, Billy, he was, pretty adamant about wanting to build something there and sustain something there. Excuse me. And I mean, 10 seasons there. I mean, it's really hard to wrap your head around the fact that NBA coaches don't last more than what 4 or 5 seasons. I mean, grant now Malone was 10 seasons, but if you look around the league, guys who have won championships, they don't even give them the benefit of the doubt to, battle their way back. I mean, you look at Mike Budenholzer with the Bucks; they won the ship too not too long ago, and then he was fired what the year later,
Yeah, next
year or
year.
two later. Yeah, so I mean, and then Monty Williams, he got the Suns to the championship, and then they fired him. Went to Detroit, had a horrible year. Detroit was terrible last year, so they fired him. But shout out to Detroit. They are in the playoffs this year. Cade Cunningham and them are balling. Isaiah Stewart will fight anybody, anytime on the court. It don't matter. But Billy, your thoughts on the fact that these coaches are not really getting the benefit of the doubt to have prolonged careers with a certain team. Uh, your thoughts on that?
For me, the respect of tenures is crazy. Like how can you
Mm-hmm.
not like stick like I get it if there was something truly behind the scenes where you needed to go a different
Mm-hmm.
direction. And obviously, I'm not a part of the organization. I don't have any good context. I don't have any inside
Yeah.
sources. But like, why wouldn't you want that legacy of a squad? And it's like, hey, obviously, as a GM and a management, standpoint, you all have to come in agreement about where you want the team to go. And if it's not going that direction, then you need to make a change. And I think that's something that's
Yeah.
probably outlined in clauses and contracts. And it's like, hey, you got to perform. Where it's like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
when he took over the Denver Nuggets, granted, he got lucky with a Jokic, a Jamal Murray, some world class players, but ultimately he helped build the organization to what it is now, to a championship level team where we
Mm-hmm.
used to never be in the playoffs. Like we were always a bottom tier team. And then once, and that was with like, after Melo or Allen Iverson, the whole Thuggets era, like, that was like what, 2003, five. I don't like
Well, Melo was there in what? He got drafted in 2003, and then he left in 2000 after the
8.
2009 season
Yeah.
because they were all in the same free agency class, like
That's what
LeBron, D Wade, Carmelo, Bosh, all them. That's when he went to New York. I'm not sure if Amari Stoudemire was already there when Carmelo went to New York, but it was after the '09 season because that was when he battled Kobe in the playoffs.
yeah. And I did think I think
And then
Stoudemire, I think Amari was there for 1 or 2 years.
yeah, because and then
And then it was like Porzingis, I think.
yeah, on the Knicks, yeah, exactly. But going back to the Nuggets, he's like you were saying, Billy, he's built that. They drafted Jamal Murray, they drafted Jokic, I mean, even before Jokic, they had uh uh Yusuf Nurkic, and then they traded,
Right.
to get other pieces. They brought in Paul Millsap, they had Gary Harris, and then they let him go to
Murray.
he's in Orlando now.
Yeah.
But you bring up the fact, those players. Murray's missed time with knee injuries, and the Nuggets have still been successful. You know what I mean? So
100%.
yeah, go on. What were you about to
I
say?
would say 100%. And like, that's, I think they're relying so much on their players. It's like, hey, don't get me wrong. We do have a couple, two, potentially three
Hmm.
all-stars of the team that are pretty consistently running the game. But, you have to kind of look at, what the standpoint is like, hey, we're fighting for a playoff spot. So we're
Hmm.
going to rely, like, don't get me wrong. I think if I'm not mistaken, the assistant coach has been there for a couple years, and he, he's very involved with the
Hmm.
organization. So I'm glad they didn't just make a quick hire or a random placement play here. So I think they're relying a lot on the players, and it's like, hey, you can only throw so much on Jokic's back. Don't get me wrong; I think
Hmm.
he's top two, maybe if not the best player in the NBA right now, with just the numbers he's putting up. But you do need the game plan behind it, and it's like, hey, if you don't have that mastermind behind the controller, or you can only do so much.
Yeah, no, valid, great points. I think another thing that is a big factor in this is why it was done at this point in time. Like we said, there's only 5 games left in the regular season. The playoffs is about to start. Uh, why couldn't they wait until after the season this, like we said, even like when we talked about last week with the Grizzlies, like
Exactly.
something had to have happened behind the scenes for them to move in this direction at this point in time. You know what I mean? Uh, there was reported, there was a rift between the GM Booth and Malone. Malone has been outspoken in the past about certain things, and there was apparently a clash there. So it was reported the Nuggets were either going to fire Malone at the end of the year or Booth at the end of the year. But for them to, just fire them both right before the playoffs, something from ownership had to have really affected that outcome.
Definitely. And it's hard to see where kind of the future where the leadership
Hmm.
and it's like, hey, I don't even necessarily know who's up for coaching roles next year and or because I
Hmm.
think they got to make a hire pretty much right after the season ends.
Hmm. And now that the GM is gone and the head coach is gone, does that mean that now their key players are open for trade? What do you do with Jokic? What do you do with Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon, Michael Porter Jr., Christian Braun, right? Like, is this now like a rebuild? If you're going to go in a different direction with a new head coach and a new GM, now you're going to have to find a pair that works together, or do you hire the GM first? Do you hire the head coach first? What? There's a lot of questions that need to be answered for Denver now.
Yeah, no, and a lot of that's above my pay grade, so I can't just be like, oh, they're going to make a high executive decision, and I think
Hmm.
it's going to be the GM first. No, I have no idea to be honest, and I think that's up for question. I think they have a little bit of time to decide over the next couple weeks, and see where things go.
So, hypothetical question, Billy. Let's say if any of those players were to be traded, who do you think is the first to be traded from the Nuggets?
In
Again,
terms of,
hypothetical.
yeah, in terms of trade value, I think it's either going to be a fairly close call between Jamal and Michael Porter Jr. To be honest, like
Hmm.
for me, when I watch Michael Porter Jr. play, he's the most off and on player. When he is on, he's maybe one of the best scorers in the NBA. But like
Talk about pure shooter.
pure shooter, can shoot the three, can dribble up, make a mid-range shot, and or pass, something down. And don't get me wrong, it helps to have the two-man game with a Jamal and or a Jokic on the court at all times.
Hmm.
But like, man, like when I watch him play, like you can't be that hit or miss. And like I know he has had taken some time off over the last year or so and dealing with some serious, personal problems. And I can never hold that against an NBA player. I can imagine going through, some of these certain circumstances, and then it being
Hmm.
public eye to just everybody.
Yeah.
Um, tough, and have that having mentality, and then you got to go perform with everything else on your mind. It's a hard thing to do. But I could say the same thing similar to Jamal Murray, like with his injuries. We watched Jamal Murray play absolutely lights out in the bubble, hitting the craziest acrobatic mid range jumpers, all over the place.
That one layup he had.
Yeah, the
Do you
up and
remember that?
yeah, the up and
Yeah, that's like video game type.
it's,
When I saw that.
it's 2K stuff, dude. And
Hmm.
but then you sit there and miss him, watch him miss free throws or just wide open jumpers, and then he'll hit these contested shots of like probably should have passed that, but like you made it.
Hmm.
You can't really say anything.
And they're all on max contracts.
And I think
Or,
that,
I
that was
mean,
probably
Jokic's on the super max.
this year is like, hey, where do we figure out the salary cap situation?
Calorie.
Yeah, it is a calorie situation in terms of that, but
Yeah.
like I said, you can't trade Jokic. I think you got to stick with. I think Christian Brown is one of the best younger players that you could stick with right now. He's a good
Role player.
player. He can
Hmm.
stick around and play, a 2 to a 4, a 1 to a 3 maybe, and then just kind of split times. But he's also a good defender. He can play the perimeter.
Hmm.
But he's not, he's also can make some good passes and shoot the ball when necessary. So I think those are
He's
two
just,
pieces you got to stick with.
yeah, he's just that high energy player, glue player that every team needs. And I mean, he was a big part in the championship run, right? His rookie year, right after coming from Kansas, right?
Yep, Kansas. And then, yeah, he had a good role player. And then we also had the kind of Bradley Beal, who was also that perfect role player at that point in time where he was hot shooting the
Oh,
ball.
Bruce Brown.
That's what I meant. That's what I meant.
Yeah, Bruce Brown.
Bruce Brown, Jesus. And then
It's all good.
and then he got a really good contract afterwards, and you can't hate to see him, take that money, dog. Like you're not going to get
Hmm.
from the Nuggets. So, it's hard to see that, but I do think that Jamal and Michael Porter Jr. might be the first. And I think in terms of trade value, you get a decent amount for him, maybe a couple second
Hmm.
round or a third round pick or something like that.
First, it'd be a first or second round pick. There's only two. But Porter probably would be my pick just because age too, considering all the like Murray's a few years older than Michael Porter. Jokic is also, I believe, is he close to 30, already 30?
Yeah,
After 30?
I want to say he's like 28, 29. Yeah.
Yeah, he might even. But I mean, Jokic, shoot, after hearing that Malone's gone, this is his only head coach. I wouldn't be surprised, not saying he'd do it, but like Jokic seems like the type of guy like he'd be like, all right, I'm good. I already won a championship, already won MVPs. I'm just gonna go back and race my horses because that's what he seems to care about more than anything. Like when you ask him about basketball, he's like so nonchalant about it, but then you see him out there with his horses and he has the biggest smile and he's racing them in chariots and it's like what so
And yeah, and
interesting things, folks. What's going to happen there in Denver? We'll for sure keep tabs on that. See how uh, these next 5 games go. Like we said, the Nuggets are in the midst of a 4-game skid, and now that they're going to be without a GM and a head coach, does that uh, play a bigger factor in their play on the court? Time will tell. Moving on to end the show, we got predictions, Billy, for a massive title fight occurring. We got UFC 314 on April 12th from the Casilla Center in Miami, Florida. Featherweight title bout between Alexander Volkanovski and Diego Lopes. Now, interesting thing here, folks. This is now a uh no it's no longer an interim. This is now the for the actual belt. Ilya Taporia vacated his championship. He's moving up a division. So now it's Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes. Volkanovski was the former champion of the division before losing to Topuria. Diego Lopes is a up and coming contender who is on a monster uh, streak right now. He's beaten some big names, notably Brian Ortega in his last fight. Volkanovski is 26-4 overall. Lopez 26-6. Billy, your predictions on the fight?
man, really excited for the card. Tons of good names. I mean, even starting from the bottom of the main card, even some of these prelims have some of these good up and comers, which I'm really excited about.
Hmm.
Kind of kicking it off. I'm going to start with the Bryce Mitchell fight. Getting coming off of getting knocked out fairly viciously from his fight against Emmett. I forget
Josh Emmett.
Josh Emmett. Thank you.
He
And
just fought this past weekend himself against Leron Murphy.
I think he lost in a decision. Good fight.
Correct. Yes.
Ultimately, tough division. It's going to be pleasantly surprising to see how Bryce Mitchell responds. He's either going to have that fire or he's not. I know Jan Silva is somebody who is a good up and comer, only 2 losses, and can fight standing up and on the ground. I know Bryce Mitchell is fairly kind of a ground wrestler, so I'm excited to see where that fight kind of goes. But with Yair Rodriguez, obviously kind of wanting to bump up in weight class as well. I'm really excited for this. Patricio is top tier, ready to go, locked and loaded. Very, good resume in terms of the UFC. I think this is going to be a good matchup for Yair. I'm excited for him to bump up a weight class and actually fight kind of healthy into his means. When you watched him in his last couple of fights, you could tell he's been drained, and that weight cut it
Hmm.
kills him. Same thing. Taking that out of your body, it ultimately affects your endurance, your chin, everything involved with that kind of fighting aspect. So I'm excited to see what his energy looks like and how he comes out, coming out as a
Hmm.
featherweight. With the Michael Chandler and Paddy Pimblett fight, I'm excited for this one. Paddy Pimblett is obviously up and coming, only 3 losses, proving he's got that chin, can take a punch, got an elite ground game, can choke out the best of them. He's a loudmouth, and I like that in a fighter. To be honest, I like them being cocky and going in. But with that, Michael Chandler is not the guy to mess with. So many knockouts since being in that trade with the whole Ben Askren, PFL, Bellator mixed trade in there. He's coming out and been nothing but proven that he is an elite fighter. He's fought in the best of the best and been in some of the best fights with like Dan Hooker. He's got 2 fights with him, and both of those were great finishes on his part. So I think I'm excited to see where that goes. I think this is going to be a defining moment in Chandler's career
Hmm.
where he takes a step back from fighting and/or makes another championship run.
Well, I mean, he waited what, nearly 2 years for Connor?
Yeah, it was at least a year and a half, and that was supposed to be the
Yeah,
fight, and it was like it got pushed back 5 times in a year. Like how
yeah,
annoying.
just and then the main event. What do you got there, Billy?
Oh yeah,
Or if you
Alexander.
want to go over that real quick.
Yep, Volk and Diego Lopez. Volk, obviously only 4 losses. Pretty sure 2 of those losses are strictly from Islam, fighting for a different belt. So you got to respect
Hmm.
the effort on him, making and advancing in different weight classes and, trying champions at such a high level. I know he even took that fight last minute when he got knocked out with that leg kick, which is unfortunate. I'm a huge Volk fan. He's a good guy. He's getting into those cooking videos, which I'm into, like show you how to cook a
Hmm.
steak the Aussie way.
No, he's a funny guy, man.
Dude, he's overall just generally a good guy too. Like he jokes
Yeah,
with the people around him. He's always a good sport, even like before, after losing fights. He's always a good sport, and you got to respect that in a fighter.
facts.
But Diego Lopez is also that guy with his weird haircut, the undercut ish with the bangs
Mullet,
on top. With it's a mullet
and then
ish,
yeah,
but
yeah. It's bangs with a mullet.
right,
I don't I don't I
maybe
don't know. He
potentially
pulls it off.
if he let it go and cut it across the eyebrows and got like a bowl cut, that could be a bullet. Like he could go
Hmm.
across the sides and back and potentially be a legendary haircut. But you also got to be one of the most elite fighters to have a haircut like that.
Hmm.
Just being said. But Diego Lopez, I think he's nothing but deserved one of these title shots. He's been beating the best, and he's proven over time with finish after finish where he is beating the top of the top in a dominant fashion. Absolutely coming out, can do a ground game, can beat you standing up, put you down, and absolutely pummel you from a ground and pound standpoint as well. Um,
Hmm.
I'm taking Alexander Volk in this fight. I like the experience. I think he's been in those title fights more than Diego Lopez has, and he's got that 5 round experience. And ultimately, when you're in the cage for 25 minutes, that is the difference. That extra 10
Hmm.
minutes is truly what defines your championship rounds. I don't think it is going to come to a finish. I think it's going to be a decision. So if I were to have to make a money line on that, that's what I would circle.
It's really hard to go against Volk. Like you were saying, Billy, his track record speaks for itself. Defeated Max Holloway 3 times, went up, challenged Islam twice for his belt, won on short notice. Uh, Terrific in all facets of the sport. Great wrestler, good striking, good jiu-jitsu, good stamina. Islam had trouble with him, if we're being honest.
Yeah,
Side
that first fight,
in that first
I see
fight, yeah,
the decision. I truly think that
yeah.
goes either way. I respect the Islam decision, but I do
Hmm.
think Volk probably did a little bit more damage. But Islam had his
Hmm.
back for a decent amount of the fight.
Oh yeah, definitely. He and then that second fight, obviously, caught with the high kick, beautifully set up,
Yep,
not taking anything away from Islam.
yep,
But and then Volk losing this last fight to Topuria, that knockout, dude, just so that's back to back knockouts, right? The
yep,
head kick followed by the head by
back
the
to back.
right hook,
Yep.
right? Right hook, left hook
Uh,
by Topuria.
it was a left. It was a left.
Yeah,
I was
he
about
like
to.
threw both the. It was like he,
The combo.
yeah, but that's where I'm now getting like really. I'm having a hard time riding with Volk on that. Just coming off those two knockouts like that. Diego's the younger fighter, hasn't taken nearly as brutal damage like that compared to Volk. So I think I'm gonna go with Lopez
I like it.
just because of just that damage that Volk has taken in his last two fights. I mean, he's taken time obviously since then,
Right.
but it's there, man. It seems like it's a real thing in the fight game, taking excessive damage like that. I mean, you look at unfortunately my one of my favorite fighters of all time, you look at Tony Ferguson. The guy's still fighting, but that after that fight with Gaethje,
Mm-hmm.
and then
And
I
then
mean he had a couple
yeah,
decisions,
you got that.
but then yeah, then that knockout from Chandler, and then he got choked out Nate Diaz, and then lost to Patty, severe losing streak there. Not to bet, bang on the guy, but like you know put him down anyway. He's one of my favorite fighters. It's just that is what it is. He lost those many fights in a row, but getting back to it, it's just seems like it's hard to really recover from taking extensive damage like that. So I think that's why I'm going with Lopez.
No, and you're right. I have watched some interviews between fighters and stuff like that before who've never been knocked out in their career. And then they start getting knocked out, and they're like, I don't know what happened. Like
Mhm.
I lost my chin a little bit,
Mhm.
stuff like that. So that is something that kind of comes around. And I almost want to say it's a similar thing, kind of what I said about Michael Chandler, where it is kind of,
Mhm.
hey, this may be a make or break for kind of a career type fight.
Yeah.
Either like, hey,
Mhm.
maybe he does have doubts in this where he hangs it up, or he
Yeah.
wins and he fights out a couple more fights as a champion and hopefully he does well, right? So,
Yeah.
but you're right. Volk's got almost 20 fights in the UFC, maybe more, and
Mhm.
a lot of those have been fucking wars, where he is a damage.
Championship fights.
5 rounds of just
Mhm.
constant action, especially at that weight
Yeah.
class too. Those guys they have the best cardio where they stick around and they're constantly in your face going
Yeah.
at it. So you know I think you're right in thinking Diego Lopez. I think I'm sticking with my heart. It's hard not to go with Volk. I love the guy.
No, yeah, I'm still on the fence on it just because, like we said, the experience and all that. Diego's only been in the UFC for less than 7 fights. I believe this is his sixth fight in the UFC. He's 4-1, right?
That's yeah,
He lost his first fight, which was also on short notice, but then he's been winning ever since then.
right.
But then, it's just when I think back to that Ortega fight with Lopez, and he pieced him up with that combo. You know what I mean? I'm just like, man, if he connects on Volk, especially considering the damage that he took in those last fights, that's where I'm like, okay, that's where I think Diego might win this. But man, it's really hard to root against Volk. I agree with you there.
I like it.
It's really hard. But we'll see what happens, folks. UFC 314 this weekend, April 12th from the Kaseya Center in Miami, Florida. We'll see what goes there. Hopefully, Volk gets the job done for Billy's sake. That's one of his fighters right there. Stay tuned for that. Uh, Recapping today, we had the torpedo bat discussion, continuation of that. Rob Manfred's latest comments. Is it good for the game of baseball? According to Rob Manfred, it is absolutely good for the game of baseball. We also have the 2025 NBA, or I'm sorry, the Basketball Hall of Fame class, which includes multiple NBA players and WNBA players, as well as uh, front office personnel, officiates, stuff like that. Michael Malone and Calvin Booth out from the Denver Nuggets, both fired today just before the playoffs. What will happen there? Stay tuned for that. And that's all we have, folks. Appreciate you tuning in today. Make sure to follow us on our socials. Billy, one more time, where can the folks find you?
Yep, we're pinching it down here in the corner at Billy the Thrill on Instagram and at Thrilly the Bill on X.
And you can find me on X at MattMTZ108. Make sure to subscribe, turn on the notification bell for alerts, and let us know what your thoughts and comments are. For Matt Gets It, I'm Matt Martinez. That's Billy Ryan. We'll see you next time.